So I'm just sorry, I'm just hitting record, so that should be recorded now. And next slide. I think there's a slide.
Okay. So here we are. We're going to develop a framework for people putting face-to-face online. Bronze for the baseline, then silver, gold for the art. Now, I don't know how many of you remember, next slide, this chap and going for gold. So this was the first thing I thought of when I did put the YouTube, but we will not play the going for gold. Next slide. I thought, well, that's all very well if you're used to distance learning, if you're used to creating these things. In my own environment, medical education, we have a fully mature master's in medical education, which is all online. But how would I feel if I worked really, really hard? Or how would I feel actually if my own course, in all its maturity, only got silver? So I quite like this meme, win silver medal, makes gold medal dad face. I don't know if I'd feel terribly happy. Next slide, please. And that baseline, how would I feel if I got bronze? So there you go. Congratulations, Dr. New at this, putting some stuff online. Not soon enough, because obviously everything was needed yesterday, that bronze level. And also, how would my students feel? How would my students feel if they found out the course they're doing is bronze? And I really feel we need to carry everyone forward through with us. We need to support our staff, which of course is why I love Shed so much, because we all understand that here. We understand the emotions involved of supporting our staff. We have sparks with us. We know we are supporting our students through this as well. Next slide, please. Now, I'm not adverse to frameworks. Frameworks are very useful, and we're all used to, for example, the Scottish Credit and Qualifications framework. Very, very useful. One that I particularly like for evaluating online teaching is from Penn University. I didn't think to put the link on actually, but you know, that is a nice, mature, and it's Creative Commons. You can adapt it to your own environment. And I feel that's a very supportive framework. So I wouldn't like you to think I'm adverse to frameworks, but it did make me reflect a bit about why was I so, this, you know, my initial thinking. And when I mentioned this to Cameron, he said, oh yes, we've got a gold framework as well. So we had a bit of a chuckle about it, but in a sort of, yes. Okay, next slide,
I'm sure I had far more enthusiasm than what you just stated there.
Oh gosh, yes, this is being recorded, isn't it? I thought, marvellous. So here, the next slide will be another framework, the Open Data Institute, which is, again, quite a nice framework. I quite like the visuals on this. And I know that our lead for IT at the University of Dundee, Jonathan Monk, he's come up with quite a useful framework like this, that we can actually remember the things that we are supposed to remembering. So I think they are very useful. Next slide, please. But I don't know, I come from software development, and I don't know if you've seen this before, and I'll read it through because the words are quite small, but this is very famous in IT, but I thought, is this going to be like our framework? How the customer explained it, how the project leader understood it, how the analyst designed it, how the programmer wrote it, how the business consultant described it, how the project was documented, what operations installed, and now I realise I've got a little message come up in front of the next one, how the customer was billed, how it was supported, and what the customer actually needed. So if we're making a framework, especially if we're doing one at breakneck speed, are we making sure that we are capturing the right things? Next slide, please. Now, a lot of you already know me, but this was a description written about me for a webinar that I did as part of my work at CNE. So this was a webinar for health professionals across the world. And my colleague Jordan Napier, and I should credit her with some of the slides which I sort of thought, oh, actually that would be useful for this talk as well, have described me as a teacher, new teaching techniques, flexible learning institutional lead, yes, overall enthusiast, lover of challenges, believer in people, ever the optimist. And I am a firm, strong believer in people. And certainly in my own institution there, and I'm sure this is true of your own, there is an amazing amount going on, an amazing amount of other people showing that, you know, they are up for a challenge. People saying, well, I hadn't realized this was so easy. People, you know, adapting new environments, new ways of working. And we need to believe in our students as well and listen to our students. And I think we do need a high level of optimism and probably a high level of resilience. I am supporting distance learning in the institution, but I now find I'm supporting those moving to this emergency remote teaching. And from emergency remote teaching, we're now moving into remote teaching as we start to think about what's going to happen in September. Where are we going to take our students next term? We don't know. Well, I strongly suspect I won't be in the building from my meeting yesterday, but we don't know how much we're still going to have to do online. We don't know what happens next. We just have to be prepared for remote teaching. We have to be prepared maybe for dual delivery. So yesterday I was talking to some students, potential students from Hong Kong, who were hoping to come over to the medical school for what they call their enrichment year. And one of them was asking about dual teaching. How will it be if I'm learning remotely and the other students are in the classroom? Well, we haven't really tried this out yet, but remember that description of me? I'm always up for a challenge. So I've you know, read around this area about the benefits and the challenges of dual delivery, and of course, thinking about it, there are three ways we could do that. We could do dual delivery, which I think was the one that she had in her mind, where you've got your whole class there in the face-to-face and her coming in remotely. Now, I have trialed that. I have done that on an OPD session with a PhD student who was a distance learner, and I really wanted her included in the PhD training that our professional development team offered, but she couldn't possibly come over from Ireland for one day. And so what we learned from that experience was she needed a very clear timetable of when she was expected in and when she wasn't expected in, because obviously we were serving things like coffee, so it was very helpful for her to know, like we've got today, we've got nice clear breaks delineated, not surprisingly, because we always have that, except we normally have the coffee actually in the room with us. And she needed that, but she also needed a presence in the classroom. That was very clear, because otherwise she could get forgotten. So when for example, we had, you know, here's some post-its, write your things you're worried about academic writing, because it was about writing your thesis, and post them on the wall. That is very easy to do with a remote student, but it's also very easy to get totally wrong. You need someone who will go and look at, you know, you need to think, how am I going to manage this? How am I then going to get that student involved, included? How am I going to get her post-its up on the wall? So in that case, it was just me looking at the chat, writing out the post-its and posting them up. But then I was thinking about it and I was thinking, but we don't know, if we do go into dual delivery, how many students we will actually have remotely. What about if we were able to pair students up. And this might work even if we're all back to face, which I hadn't thought of until just now. This is why it's so good talking through things. I'm thinking, I know, because I have seen the plans of Dundee University, I know that our people's craft, working out how we get back in, those business recovery people have drawn out all of the rooms. They've modelled what would it be like with 33% occupation. Oh, we can't do the 2 meters. We cannot do the 2 meters. We're going to have to go to 25%. 25% occupancy on a lot of the rooms. So how are we going to manage that? Well, supposing we had half, or we ran the session twice, and then for each session, half of them were in the lab, and then half of them were remotely, and we paired all the students up. So suddenly we're making really good use of peer support. And then the next session, you reverse it. Would that work? So we're all having these challenges. We're all starting to think up solutions. So I'm seeing just a post from from someone from the OU about how, yes, hybrid teaching is already going on. And it's interesting also when we start talking about terms. I did a glossary. My director for quality assurance asked me for a glossary. And I realized that, what some people think of as hybrid teaching isn't what I think of as that dual delivery, where you've got remote and face-to-face at the same time. A lot of the literature talks about hybrid, what I would call blended. But from the comment, I'm guessing that the OU's understanding of the word hybrid is where you've got people remotely and in the room at the very same time. So I guess, if I was going to make recommendations from this talk, rather than just going on Susie just rambles through some thoughts, that might be a first recommendation: getting a glossary, getting a common institutional understanding. So yes, the language is rather fluid. Now, another way we could do dual teaching, of course, is to run the session 4 times. That's absolutely possible if we're bringing them all in, assuming they're all within our institution, that they can get in. But then, because we are the ones who are supporting the staff, we can look at, well, how does that feel for our staff? How does that feel to suddenly have to do the same thing 4 times? How is that for workload? Is that an efficient way to use our staff? So these things are all starting to percolate at the moment, but these are the questions. Yes, health and well-being. I think, the health of our staff is absolutely key. We really, really need to look after our staff. And of course, I include ourselves in that. And then, so from remote teaching to blended learning. And another thing we're all very aware, you can change the slide, thank you, Cameron. Another thing we're very aware of is that that some of our students, even though we're all back, may suddenly be taken ill, need to quarantine for 2 weeks. So we have to be considering those students as well. So when I do sessions, I very much always talk, if it's face-to-face or remote, about role modelling and how we're all role modelling all the time. So this is a slide that I actually used on Tuesday, talking about that welcome and orientation, and about the ground rules, and Fiona shared with us the ground rules. And it's interesting for me to watch new tutors or talk to new tutors, and they don't automatically think of things like the ground rules, which of course are very obvious to us because we're used to doing this. And they would do it in a face-to-face situation. But I think, they're sort of a bit into panic mode. So getting them into some good ground rules. But the reason I then decided to keep this in is because when I put it in, I thought, oh, that's a nice slide to put in for role model. And then I noticed, and it's even worse now because I've got 5 people down the side. I don't know if you have, but actually on the one with all the people, there are 2 women and 1 non-white person in there. So there really isn't the diversity that they should be in their slides. I know that is not a teaching point just for being remote learning. That is a teaching point that they should all be conscious of anyway. So I thought, oh gosh, I have to redo that. I found this nice thing, but and I've nicely referenced where I've got it from. And now I'm going to have to make up a whole new slide. And then I thought, well, no, actually, I'm going to leave it in because we need, I think, to show more of the development, how we develop things, the errors, the things we notice. So actually, I thought, well, it'd be more memorable to them if I leave that up and then say why I'm not happy with that. Okay, next slide, please. So listening to my staff, I mean, that's something I think all of us in Shed are extremely skilled at, listening to our staff, not jumping in, listening. What are they worried about? Well, all these words buzzing around, Zoom, Teams, Skype, VLE, podcast, vodcast, webcast. We might have a fairly good idea what all these things are, but a lot of my staff, or a lot of my faculty, they are on the brink of panic, I think, quite a bit of the time. So I see my job very much as listening to them and calming down, keeping that calmness, which certainly when the framework was first talked about, I wasn't getting that from my staff. I feel now as they get more comfortable, now is maybe a time that we can start talking about frameworks. But I still not totally happy with the idea of gold and silver. And it will be interesting at the end to open this up and find out your thoughts. Next slide, please. And of course, for a lot of my faculty, and myself included, we miss normal. There are things we are missing. Oh, there are things that we're enjoying, but there are still things that I think, yes, normal. And what will this new normal be? Next slide, please. So talking to my own faculty, making sure that there are open, safe sessions, and we decided not to record these sessions because we felt actually staff would feel safer opening up about what they're worried about if we didn't record them. So that was a discussion that we had, and that was the decision we made. They're worried about whole class lectures. They're very comfortable with whole class lectures. They know what they're doing. You've got 165 medical students to deliver a lecture to. That lecture is written. How do you convert that into an online activity that the student will be happy with as an equivalence? For medical school, obviously, patient contact is a huge challenge. Lab work also in science and engineering, field trips in geography, workshops and workspaces in art, lots and lots of challenges. Architecture. They're also missing the vibes they get from facilitating small groups of learners, those spidey senses, knowing where there's a concept the students are not grasping. I can see Fiona nodding here. Yeah, absolutely. This is something that, and when your student is at a distance, you can't always pick up those things. But also the sounding boards, their community of practice of other educators in the same room with a cup of coffee. Those corridor discussions, those bumping into people in, seeing Anne-Marie in the coffee shop at the library and plonking myself down next to her and having a really good chinwag with Anne-Marie. I miss that. And also, what about their professional identity as the expert? Are we supporting their needs there? Are we caring for them? Are we helping them to recognize it's okay to be worried? It's okay to not be expert at everything. So thinking about their professional identity. Next slide, please. So going back to this going for gold, you know, is that a useful concept? Next slide, please. And I like this one, you know, because going for broke, these two pigeons, what's the opposite of going for broke? And the other one says, honest, stable, harmless, protected, certain, definite, secure, sure, and strong. We don't want our staff going for broke and then breaking themselves. I'm starting to hear a lot now about we have to manage our workloads. We've done a lot of emergency remote moving stuff that people have been putting in huge amount of work, many hours of work, a lot of Teams meetings, a lot of energy, and we cannot sustain this. We're being told by HR, you have to take your holidays. You should have taken nearly half your annual leave by now. And I'm thinking, oh dear, I think I've taken 1 day. You know, I mean, yes, all my external holidays have been cancelled, but there's so much work to do. So I need to give myself a good talking to about this and say, take some time off, take some time off. Look after yourself. You cannot sustain this. Next slide. Otherwise, even if we're not at this stage now, we're soon going to be at this stage. Next slide. And then I've already mentioned my spaniels, but I don't know if you've seen this one where someone has emphasized bits to make it look like a spaniel. Sorry, I can never resist putting silly things in. Next slide, please. So we're very much, certainly at Dundee, thinking about their normal educator toolkit, getting them to think about, you know, building on what they already know. They already know about facilitating learner engagement. They already know about acting as springboards for discussion, supporting students, assessing students, challenging students, and aiding their own practice development. Next slide, please. And we just need to work with them at what are the extra tools they need. And also looking at how we can view this as an opportunity. How can we look at it as an opportunity for supporting our faculty? What new skills do they need to be supported in? But also how we support our faculty. We're having to move from a lot of face-to-face stuff to online. We're all in this together. And so I do share that with my faculty, you know, and the mistakes, the errors, my emotions, how I'm feeling. I'm a very open person. I overshare probably, but you know, I'm on this Corona coaster. I thought it was a great word when I came across it. I thought absolutely, and I never know when it's going to hit me. Encouraging them to try activities they've been avoiding. And I'm putting myself in this box. I run a module on professional identity for our professional doctorate. And last year we were asked to start using Teams. And I set up a team and I looked at this team and it says hello, and the other two tutors, hello. And this year I said, oh, do you know, we should set up a team. And I looked, I thought, oh, I've already set up a team. Oh, I set it up last year. That's as far as we got last year. And then I avoided it because I didn't have time to learn a new thing. Well, we've all learned how to use Teams now, certainly at the University of Dundee. My goodness. And now we're quite comfortable with Teams. So it's certainly encouraged me to try activities I've been avoiding. And very often I will hear faculty saying, oh, I didn't realise it was as easy as that to record a lecture. And think, well, yeah, there we go. The novelty of online learning approaches may in themselves spark learner engagement. And again, we've got staff pleasantly surprised about that. Next slide, please. So for my own faculty, what's missing right now in medical education and what could they use instead? So patient contact, most definitely. But, you know, there are patient stories, data still can be shared and discussed. There's lots there online. So I now see part of my role as curator of online resources. And communication point, collecting those in a place, because then I say, look, maybe you've got some really good things that you could share as well. And pointing, networking people. It's what I love doing most anyway. But, you know, putting people in contact. We've put up a Padlet. I've already said, you know, we decided not to record these sessions, weekly sessions, but we've put up a Padlet where people can then add their questions, add their concerns. One of them had said, this is a really boring technical. If I use oh gosh, I've forgotten the name of it, Juba, you know, the videoing thing that we now encourage to use. The file sizes are enormous. So just as you would in the classroom, you know, it's a time, Uja, thank you, Anne-Marie. You know, so there is no such thing as a boring question. There is no such thing as a stupid question. If you are worried about it, this is the safe place to put these questions up. If they're worrying about the vibes they get from facilitating small groups, we can help them, you know, go on to small group teaching. We've already had an example of how Zoom, you can put people into small groups and out again. So when we're running these sessions once a week for our tutors, we're using different technologies to role model those different technologies for them. The sounding boards are very much still there. Our open sessions are those communities of practice, our coffee mornings. All these things are still happening. They're just in a different way. Next slide, please. So very much getting them to think about evolving and expanding their existing toolkit, not throwing out everything they already know and are happy with, but looking at how they adapt to this new world we're in, and listening, really listening to their worries. And again, it comes back to there's no such thing as a stupid question. There's no such thing as boring question. Next slide, please. And this may be the time for us to be, you know, like the phoenix, finding new life from that blended approach. And maybe when we've got a little bit more time, once we've got out of that emergency remote teaching, really starting to think, you know, we have examples of assessment by exam where tutors are saying, well, actually, no, you're right, maybe that wasn't the best way to examine those particular learning outcomes. And perhaps this open book essay that they've got X hours to work on is a better way to measure that. And so some of these changes may actually stay. Some of them won't, but some of them may. Thinking about what can be done online and what can't be done online, but maybe can be done at home. So the example I give here is something that I saw a really good workshop that was devised by the Royal College of Surgeons, and it seemed to involve an awful lot of chicken thighs. And I remember one of the activities they had to do, this was for students in surgery, there was a chicken thigh that had been cut and some broken polo mint put in it. And this is a very good simulation, and a quite cheap simulation, for cleaning glass out of a wound. And then they suture it. And I'm thinking, well, you know, maybe the students could do that at home. Maybe there are skills that they could practice at home. I'm not quite sure what you do about the vegetarian ones, but you know, there's a really good writer, Roger Kneebone, who has worked a lot with theatre, looking at what are the key concepts that you need for a good simulation. Low fidelity, corn fillets. I don't know, maybe we could try a corn fillet. There you go. But and I don't actually know if polo mint's a vegetarian either. So thinking about supporting our staff, you know, getting them to think, right, if you have a student email your question and you reply, that takes quite a bit of your time. You might have 10 students sending you that same question. And yes, you could go and copy your reply, but why don't you instead think about putting that on a discussion board? So things where discussion boards have been very unpopular before, I think it's just about guiding our staff through good use of discussion boards. Short video for summing up discussions rather than having to answer every discussion. So I'm finding a lot of, you know, a lot of talk about how we better use discussions. how we include lots of formative, because student engagement obviously is another great worry. And this thinking, it doesn't all need to be tutor marked. Formative for the student. What about peer evaluated? We know from the literature that actually marking something, you're gaining quite a lot. So the student peer evaluating is gaining a lot. Bananas are good for future practice. Excellent. You see, here we go. Lots of ideas coming in. Computer mark and self-assessment, where you put up the, the gold standard, and the student self-assesses themselves. Another concern, next slide please, that's coming up a lot is about staying legal, about being accessible. And of course, that's both disability access and technology access. Worries about video quality, audio quality. I had one tutor saying, is the medical school going to provide a sound studio? And I'm thinking, my goodness, I can hear you perfectly on this Teams thing. If we videoed this Teams meeting, your students would find that quality absolutely fine. But of course, without hearing him say that, I would never have thought that was a concern. But obviously, for some people, the concern is about getting headsets, file sizes, software to use for what, how to convert a 2.5-hour lecture online, student engagement. How do I stop the student feeling shortchanged? So another question that came up was, I recorded my 1-hour lecture and it only lasted 30 minutes. Will my students feel shortchanged about that? Next slide, please. So my worries, I'm worrying about what do they already know? Sometimes I assume too much, sometimes I assume too little. What language are they unfamiliar with? So I found that actually a lot of them don't actually know the term student effort budget, and how to actually create a good student effort budget. What are their networks of support? What are they really worrying about, and how do I reassure them? How do I take them to those next stages? And how do I, going back to that student effort budget, how do I help them put in time estimates and timetabling? How do I, show them how to do that, which I know is good for students to seek the depth of study, good for tutors to check the size of expectation, good for quality assurance to see how time equivalent is being handled, and good for funders to see that value for money is being maintained. And of course, that 30-minute lecture, it just needs to have some think points, some bits in the recording where he says, stop the video and jot down 5 reasons for such and such, for using a banana for suturing. And, and that's how you develop your 1-hour lecture. Very much, again, next slide, please, about avoiding tutor burnout. And also we need to help them think about what's changing in their own practice that should now be reflected in curricula. And, I look back to how I was teaching about telemedicine and how adverse a lot of the UK was to telemedicine, about phoning in for a consultation. My goodness, that's changed now, hasn't it? And how much will that stay afterwards? And of course, online consultation is something that they could be practicing role play with each other. Next slide, please. So we know we should be mindful of attention spans. So I am now coming to the end of the Zoom, and then I will get you to I've got some questions at the end. But also think about your students and think about what you need to be synchronous, what needs to be at the same time, and what can be asynchronous, and also how to support synchronous for those who can't make it at that time, either because of time zone, because of childcare. And Zoom fatigue, as I think we all know, is a very real thing. Next slide, please. And I like this slide, which comes from London University. Be realistic, be professional, be confident. Listen to your learners. Reuse materials. You don't need to create everything from scratch. Help them to get help and show yourself that you are getting help. Role model that as well, and be kind to yourself. And I think we added the be kind to yourself, Fiona. That one was missing. Next slide, please. So my colleague Jordan, she wrote that. We sent it off to the accessibility guy for him to put the accessibility slide in for us. And actually he came back saying he did an accessibility review of these slides, which he said that one shouldn't be in handwriting. So there you go. Again, I'm role modeling. And I'm saying we made a mistake there. Next slide, please. So that's where I'm going to finish this. But what I'm interested in is your views on framework. Do you have a gold framework? Who develops the framework? Is it gold, two-edged? And also, who implements that framework? And who evaluates? Is it for self-evaluation? So the one from Penn University is very much encouraging self-evaluation and peer evaluation. Is it for people like ourselves, faculty developers? And we already, you know, we do a lot of peer observation of face-to-face teaching. And I know some of you do already do observation of online teaching. Is it for line managers? You know, does it suddenly become more of a stick than a carrot? Is it for quality assurance? Or do the students evaluate against the framework? Do we encourage them to do that? What's its real purpose? Is it formative, summative, marketing? Oh my goodness, or is it just a tick box? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Susie. That's fabulous. Susie, do you want people to respond to, sorry, I'm going to cough again. Do you want people to respond to the questions by just opening the mic and just sharing?
That would be nice. Yep, that would be great, especially since I can't find chat now.
So while Susie's finding chat, any thoughts on those questions? Again, remembering that this is our space to be able to talk and share and question and challenge each other. So yeah, any questions? Just open your mic and talk with Susie.
Talk to me.
Hi Susie, it's Alison here from QAA.
Hi Alison.
I just wanted to echo, I think, what you said near the beginning, that I think frameworks are usually, frameworks can be extremely helpful, but we have to be critical of the idea of introducing something that kind of, what's the word? Puts people in that gold, silver, bronze thing at a time of crisis. I think is not the time to do that. And I saw somebody else saying, I think, was it Fiona saying, do we have the bravery to use the phrase good enough? And I always